Hello and thanks for joining me. In this video, I'm going to answer the 10 most frequently asked questions about the Triumph Scrambler 1200. Probably, like me, you will spend quite a lot of time on various internet forums. I do, particularly over the winter, and I'm on a lot of Triumph Scrambler forums. And even though these forums are primarily aimed at owners of the bikes, you do get a lot of people joining the forum because they are considering buying the bike, and they have a lot of questions to ask. And so there are certain questions which come up time and time again. So what I've done is compile a list of what I consider to be the 10 most frequently asked questions about the Triumph Scrambler 1200. And I'm going to go through each of these and answer them from my perspective. So I've made myself a mug of coffee here, and we're going to start with the most frequent question by far, which is the Triumph Scrambler any good off-road? Firstly, I have to say that that is not a straightforward question to answer. How good is it off-road? It depends on a number of factors. Firstly, what do you mean by off-road? If you're simply talking about getting off the tarmac onto a gravel road, or are you talking about tackling something really quite technical and gnarly? The second element of factor variable in there is how experienced and how confident are you as an off-road rider. And then I would say a third important factor is what kind of tyres are you running on the bike. But of course, I could make all those 3 points about any bike's off-road capability. I can talk about the bike's off-road capability from my own experience, because this is my Triumph Scrambler behind me, and I've owned this for quite a few years now, and I have done quite a bit of off-road riding on it. Now, I would say that I am an experienced off-road rider. I have been riding off-road for many, many years on both big bikes and smaller bikes, and I wouldn't say I'm a very, very competent off-road rider, but I'm a very confident off-road rider. And my experience is that it is very good off-road. It's a very, very capable off-road bike, provided you have the right tyres on it. On this bike, I've tried a couple of different types of off-road tyres. I've had the Anarchy Wilds on it, and I've had the what they call TKC 80s on the bike. If you put something like that on, then it's amazing what you can do on this bike. Let's get into some of the specifics then. What aspects of the bike make it good for off-road riding? Well, one is the riding position. Both sitting and standing, it's a very good riding position for riding off-road, and also it's a bike that you can move about on well. It's got the flat bench seat. There isn't a huge hump of a tank in the way in front of you, so you're able to move back and forwards on the bike very well. It's not too wide. You're able to move side to side, and that's helped by the fact that the bike has pretty wide bars as well. A second aspect of the bike which makes it good off-road is the suspension. Now, I'm going to talk more about suspension specs later, but mine is the XE version, which is the most off-road oriented version. It has the longest suspension travel and the beefiest suspension on it. And yeah, it's very impressive, is the suspension for off-road riding. If you compare it to other large capacity adventure bikes, I would say that this is a lot more off-road capable. And thirdly, the engine power delivery I find to be very good for off-road riding. It's a twin cylinder. It's a bit of a thumper. The power and the torque are all low down, which is really what you want for off-road riding. And I find that the power delivery in particular makes it quite easy to ride off-road. Particularly because one of the negative things I would say about it is the gearing is quite high, particularly if you want to do more technical off-road riding. It's fine just riding, fire roads or, forest tracks, things like that. But if you get onto something more technical, I find the gearing to be quite on the tall side. But of course you could change that. If you're doing a lot of off-road riding, I guess you could change the sprockets to change the gearing on it. But I've left mine with the normal road gearing. So getting on the more technical stuff, I wish it was a bit lower geared. So because it's quite high geared, it really helps the fact that the engine just pulls like a train from nothing. So you can just basically ride along in second gear with the engine just ticking over, and it'll just pull from that kind of rev. Another issue, a negative issue about riding it off-road, but this is a very personal thing, personal to me, and that is it is a bit heavy. But that's true of all of these big adventure bikes, and this Triumph Scrambler is nowhere near as heavy as a lot of the other comparable adventure bikes because it's a naked bike. But mine is 207 kilograms dry weight. So by the time you've got your fuel, your oil, everything on it, and you're on it, it's a heavy beast, and you really do feel that, particularly when things start going wrong off-road. It's a lot more difficult to recover a big heavy bike like this than it is something lighter. So because I do a lot of off-road riding, I prefer to do it on lighter bikes. So as I have taken this bike off-road because, like any new owner, when I got it at first, I really wanted to explore the capabilities of the bike. But these days, I don't really ride it on anything more serious than just gravel roads, forest roads, things like that, which I'm perfectly happy to ride it on. And for the more serious off-road riding, I've got bikes which are much smaller and lighter. I've got a 450 KTM, I've got 300 beta, which are much smaller and lighter, and I just enjoy riding those kind of bikes off-road more than struggling, in my case battling with the weight of a bigger, heavier bike. And I would make a final negative point about riding the bike off-road, and that is that if you drop it, there is potential for doing a lot of expensive damage to this bike, unlike things like my KTM enduro bike, which I can drop and throw all over the place and just pick it up and get back on. With this, if you damage the petrol tank, that's really expensive to replace, and other bits are likely to bend and break off. You can get protection, obviously, to improve that, and if you've seen some of my previous videos, you can see that I fitted both lower and upper engine bars to my bike to offer more protection when I do ride it off-road. I've also fitted a radiator guard to the bike as well. But if you are riding this bike seriously off-road, then I think you need to go further than that. Say fit some decent hand protection, for protecting your levers, things like bark busters, fit some folding mirrors, something like the double tape mirrors to it as well. And you've got to be prepared for, damage to the bike, bending, breaking, denting, exhausts, petrol tanks, things like that. You've just got to be prepared for that if you want to ride a bike like this off-road. But overall, I would say, yeah, it is looking at it in its class of the sort of bigger, larger capacity adventure motorcycles, very, very capable off-road. That's one of its strengths. If that's what you want to do with a big bike, definitely one of its strengths. The second frequently asked question about the Triumph Scrambler 1200 is whether it is comfortable for riding long distances. And the short answer to that is yes, it is. And that's why I use mine as a long distance touring bike. But I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of the pros and cons, some of the specifics on that. What are the factors that make it a good long distance bike then? Well, I would say first and foremost, the riding position. It's a very comfortable riding position for touring. You've got a good upright riding position, which is what I find both most comfortable for long distances, but also for touring when you're wanting to look around and enjoy the scenery. It's got nice wide handlebars. I find the foot position is good. You can move, because it's a bench seat, you can move around quite a bit on the seat. You're not sort of restricted to one position as you are in a sort of more of a bucket shaped seat. So I find the riding position very, very good for long distance riding. The second factor, and this is very important, is the engine. The engine is just so relaxing. Because it's a twin and because it achieves peak power and peak torque at such low revs, it just feels a very relaxing bike to ride. It feels like you're never really pushing or straining the engine. You rarely have to sort of change down gears to do overtakes, or if you just want to open it up a little bit. And that, cumulatively over long distances reduces fatigue and stress. Another factor which does make it suitable for touring is that there are now increasing number of luggage options available for the bike, which means that, if you do want to go off, for a longer trip, or particularly if you want to go camping, yeah, you can easily carry your gear on the bike. And I have made separate videos. I've made a couple of videos about this. I made a video about a couple of years ago now about how I carry all my camping gear on the bike. And then more recently, I have upgraded my luggage carrying system to some panniers where I've got panniers on both sides of the bike, and I made quite a detailed video about all of the different luggage options that are currently available for the Triumph Scrambler. So check out that video on my list if you're interested in the different luggage options. I get so passionate about talking about these things, I'm letting my cup of coffee go cold, so I have a quick slurp on my coffee before I carry on. I really get into this when I start talking about the bike. So let's have a look at some of the negative things then about the bike for long distance comfort. Now, I mentioned that the bench seat is a positive aspect because you can move around, you can move your butt around on the seat. But for a lot of people, the seat is not too comfortable. It's not sculptured to the shape of your backside. The padding on it is not too thick, particularly if you've got the lower seat, and I'll talk more about the seat options later. It's not very thick padding on it, so when you're in the saddle for longer periods, it can start to get uncomfortable. Some people say they're absolutely fine with it. Other people say it's uncomfortable. I would say I'm okay with it up to a limit. And if you've seen any of my videos about touring, you'll see that I put a sheepskin cover over the saddle, and that makes a huge difference for me. And I find with that, then it's comfortable enough. However, possibly next year, I'm planning a couple of longer rides. I might look into getting a custom seat. If I do, of course, I will make a video about that. Another obvious thing about the Scrambler 1200 is that it is a naked bike. And so if you do a lot of high speed riding on motorways, that can be quite tiring. Now, I toured for 4 years on mine with just a small screen on the front, little fly screen on the front, which didn't really offer that much in the way of wind protection. But last year I decided, after some very long days on motorways, I decided to go for a bigger touring screen. Again, I've made a separate video about that. I got the Unit Garage extra large touring screen, and some people will say that spoils the aesthetics of the bike, and I understand where they're coming from when they say that. But just for me, because it's my touring bike, it's made a big difference, and I'm glad I made that change. It's just made the bike so much more comfortable for long days in the saddle. But if you want to leave the bike naked, as I said, I toured for 4 years without a touring screen. It all just depends on what kind of speed you're riding at. I find at speeds up to 70 miles an hour, I don't need a screen on any kind of bike. But if you're doing, faster motorway stints, it does get tiring very, very quickly if you're riding at higher speeds. But anyway, that's the way it is. I just want to wrap up this session by saying that the overriding factor, which for me makes this such a great bike for riding longer distances on and for touring on, is that it is such a fun bike to ride. I just want to get on it and ride it. And when I'm off on a trip and I'm away for several weeks, and I was off touring for several months this summer on the bike, every morning I get up, I get out of my tent, I look at the bike, and I just want to get on it and ride it because I enjoy riding it so much. And surely that's got to be the most important factor with a bike. If you get up in the morning and you look at your bike and you don't think, oh God, I've got to do another day on the saddle, it's definitely not the right bike for you. Whereas this bike is great. I love it. I love every minute of riding it. I find it's great, if you're having to just munch up the miles on a motorway, it will do it. And particularly now I've got the screen on it, it does it effortlessly. But also it handles really well, and with the engine it's just such fun on the twisties as well. So yeah, other bikes, good, but for me, this just wins out. I love it. The third frequently asked question about the Triumph Scrambler is which model is best for off-road riding. As of making this video, Triumph offer three versions of the bike, or have offered three versions of the bike, which is the XE, which is the model which I have. Then there's the XC, and then more recently they introduced the X. I would say that all three bikes are capable off-road if you put the right tyres on them. If you're just wanting to be riding forest roads, gravel tracks, things like that, all three perfectly capable of doing that very well. But of the three models, the one which is most off-road oriented and was designed by Triumph more specifically for off-road use, it's this one. It's the XE. The XE has a longer swing arm. It has beefier suspension, front and rear, and it has longer suspension travel. In fact, it has really, really impressive suspension travel. Has 250 millimeters suspension travel, which outshines just about all of the large adventure bikes. It makes it more of an off-road bike actually than an adventure bike. The XE model also has better electronics for riding off-road. I'll talk about rider modes in a moment, but all of the Triumph Scramblers have an off-road mode, but the XE has an off-road pro mode. And in the off-road pro mode, it entirely switches off traction control and the ABS system, and it remaps the throttle into the off-road riding mode. So if you're a serious off-roader, then the XE is the clear choice. It's also got the wider bars, which make for better leverage when you're riding off-road. It's also much taller than the other models because of the longer suspension travel, which means that you've got better ground clearance if you're on very rough ground and clearing obstacles. So as I said, if you're just riding green lanes, forest roads, gravel roads, things like that, all three of them are perfectly capable. But if you really want to do the more gnarly, serious off-road stuff, the XC is the bike for you. That's what it's built for. The fourth frequently asked question is how much power does the Triumph Scrambler have? Now, all the three models have the same engine. It's the 1200cc water-cooled twin, and that delivers 89 brake horsepower at 7,000 RPM, and it delivers a maximum torque of 81.1 foot-pound at 4,250 RPM. Now, the important thing to emphasize here about the bike is how that power translates to riding experience, because on paper that doesn't look like much power compared to other large capacity adventure bikes, since the offerings from BMW, KTM, Honda, the other mainstream manufacturers, and they all sort of offer bikes that weigh over 100 brake horsepower. With the Triumph, it feels, because that power and the maximum torque is so low down in the rev range, it feels a lot more powerful than it is, because the power that is there is instantly usable. You don't have to wring the neck of the poor bike to squeeze that power out of the bike. And I have been riding, touring around Europe with friends on other big adventure bikes that have got, some of them have got like, 50, 60 brake horsepower on their bikes. And I was worried, I remember, that I would be struggling to keep up with them, and not at all. In no circumstances did my Scrambler feel underpowered in comparison to those other bikes. And interestingly, I've got a friend who has owned and ridden BMW GSs for many, many years. He's had several 1200s, 1250s, and he bought the Triumph Scrambler 1200, and he swore blind that it was much more powerful than his BMWs. Even though on paper it's not, because that power just seems to be so more easily accessible at the lower revs. For me, I think the big issue is the fact that maximum torque comes in at just over 4,000 RPM. It's technically 4,250 RPM. If you compare that to just about every other comparable bike on the market, they're all not reaching peak torque until 6,500 revs, something like that, which is considerably higher in the rev range. So it just feels that you've got to sort of work that little bit harder to get that power out of the bike. Whereas with the Triumph, it does feel effortless. So I would say for practical riding, the Triumph has more than enough power, more than enough. And I've never ever sort of felt, oh, I wish I had more power on the bike. You might have other riders with bigger balls than me who maintain that it needs more power, but not me. So where are we? I think we're at number 5. The 5th frequently asked question is, what aftermarket accessories are available for the Triumph Scrambler? And the answer to that is that there are quite a lot. And there's now the bike's been well established, it's been around for quite a few years, an increasing number of accessories around. And so, of course, what accessories you fit depend on what sort of style, how you want to change the bike to adapt to yourself. So changes that are very popular are the rear fender eliminator, getting rid of that long plastic stem on the back, moving the number plate up, relocating the indicators. That's very, very popular change. And so there are a few different aftermarket companies offer adapters for doing that. Another popular thing is fitting the high level mudguard, the high level fender. Triumph themselves offer the higher level fender, so you can put that up to give it that sort of more aggressive off-road look. And again, talking about more aggressive off-road look, the wheels are fairly standard sizes on this bike, so there's a very, very good range of tyres available. All manufacturers offer both, road oriented. I'm sort of running what they call 80-20 tyres on mine at the moment, but I have had 50-50 tyres in the past. There's a very, very good range. All the mainstream tyres basically that you might want to fit on it, they come in the sizes here, so you're fine with that. In terms of other specific changes that people are going to make, other popular changes are the fitting bar end mirrors or fitting folding mirrors if you want to ride off market. There's plenty of generic options available for those. When I say generic, I mean they're not specific to this model. They just fit on pretty much any bike, and also things like bark busters. Again, if you're riding off road, again they're sort of fairly generic. You can fit the bark busters on those. But in terms of specific changes, luggage. There are now an increasing number of luggage options. Triumph make a rear luggage rack. It's not rated for carrying very high weights, is that the right way of putting it? Yeah, heavy loads. So I wouldn't really recommend putting a top box on that. I think a few people have tried that and had problems with stress fractures on it. Triumph also do make the left-hand side pannier. They don't make a right-hand side pannier because of the high-level exhaust, but there are plenty of other now aftermarket suppliers offering both left side and both side panniers. I did make a separate video about that, so if you look in my video playlist, or I'll probably put a link in this video to it, there are quite a lot of options there in terms of luggage. Same with screens. A lot of options with screens. Triumph make different screens, but there are now several of the mainstream screen manufacturers making from little fly screens through to big touring screens. Again, I've made a separate video all about the screen options, reviewing all of the options that are available to date for the bike, plenty of those. With seats, there are a few aftermarket options for seats. Triumph themselves make a few different seats, so you can either get the black seat or the brown seat, and they make the standard seat and they make a lower seat as well to sort of reduce the seat height on the bike. But then there are a few other companies making aftermarket seats for the bike. I'm still with the standard seat on my bike, but I'm looking at the possibility of getting either an aftermarket one or having mine customised next year. So of course, if I do that, I will make a video about it. Other popular changes that people make are to the exhaust. So people are changing the exhaust either to make it a little bit lighter from the standard one, or to eliminate the catalytic converter, or in many cases it seems to be, reading on forums, people just want to make the bike louder. So one of the conversions which seems to be quite popular is this sort of slash cut one. So it's either like the sort of slash cut from the James Bond movie, or when Guy Martin did the recreation of the Great Escape jump, he had a bike with a slash cut exhaust on it. They seem to be very popular. I've kind of shied away from that because I have heard a bike with a slash gut, and because I use mine for touring, it's just far too loud. I don't want to be making that kind of noise when I'm touring, so I've stuck with the standard exhaust. I've removed the catalytic converter from it, but I've still got the standard exhaust on mine. But there are plenty of options, and also there is a low level exhaust. So Zard make a low level exhaust for the bike, which is quite popular, people wanting to sort of change the look and the style of it. And also I guess it makes it easier to put panniers on if you've got a low level exhaust. And then finally, the other kind of changes that people make to the bike are things like engine protection. So Triumph make low level engine bars. I think there are other manufacturers make the low level bars as well. The bike comes standard with a skid plate anyway, and then you can get high level bars. I've got some SW Motec, I believe they are high level bars on mine, and then radiator guard if you're looking for that better protection for off-road riding. So again, I've got the Triumph heavy duty aluminium radiator guard on mine. So yeah, there are plenty of accessories, and as the bikes are growing in popularity and becoming more well established, then there are more accessory options becoming available every year. Where are we? 6. The frequently asked question number 6. How does the Triumph Scrambler compare to other large capacity adventure bikes? Well, I feel quite well qualified to answer this because I've owned or have ridden most of the large capacity adventure bikes that are available on the market. You know, I've owned big KTM adventure bike, I've owned the BMW GS, and I've ridden most of the I've ridden the Harley Davidson Pan America, the Honda Africa Twin. I'm trying to think of some of the others. I've ridden quite a lot of them, and I think the telling thing from my perspective is that, you know, even having ridden all of these other large adventure bikes, I choose to ride the Triumph Scrambler as my touring bike, my adventure touring bike. So that I think that itself just speaks volumes about my attitude towards how it compares. I would say my attitude about the Scrambler is that it does everything it needs to do, but it does with more style than the alternatives. But of course, that's a matter of personal taste. I just like the retro styling of the bike. Of course, if you've watched some of my other videos, you will know that I have made changes to the bike to make it more suitable for me. So, you know, I've fitted panniers, I've fitted a touring screen, I've done, you know, quite a few changes. I've made a very detailed video about all the changes I made. So again, I'll put a link in the description to this video. But you know, I still stick with this bike because I love it. I love the riding experience of the bike. I love the way it looks. So I like it when I'm riding it. I like it when I'm just looking at it, you know, and that, you know, isn't that what a bike's about? You know, loving it. And so for me, it works. And at the moment, I've got absolutely no intention of changing it for anything else. So yeah, as I say, that I think is my verdict, isn't it? This is what I choose to ride. Frequently asked question number 7. What is the fuel economy like on the Scrambler 1200? Well, all 3 models, the XE, the XC and the X, they all have the same fuel tank, which is a 15-litre fuel tank. That translates to roughly 3.3 UK gallons, imperial gallons, or 3.9 US gallons. It's important to recognise that a US gallon is different to a UK imperial gallon. So when you're talking about miles per gallon, it depends on which kind of gallon you're talking about. Now, when I got my bike at first, it was averaging about 58 miles to the gallon, which I was delighted with because I just changed it in from a BMW GS 1200, on which I was getting about 45 miles to the gallon. So that was great. But then I removed the catalytic converter. I've made a separate video. I simply just cut the exhaust pipe and took the catalytic converter out. And much to my surprise, this is not why I did it to try and overcome the heat problem, but much to my surprise, that massively improved the fuel consumption of the bike. So now I'm averaging about 68 miles to the gallon. Unless I do a long day at very high speed on the motorway, I'm getting between about 65 and 70 miles to the gallon from the bike, which is really quite incredible. So that gives me a fuel range of 200 miles comfortably on the bike, as I say, unless I'm really thrashing it on the motorway. So when I'm touring, I typically start looking for more fuel around about 160, 170 miles, and that gives me plenty of lee room then if I don't find anywhere immediately. And I think that's fairly comparable with other touring bikes. Obviously, it's nothing like the big, things like the GS Adventure with the huge fuel tanks. I mean, I could get 400 miles out of my GS, but we're playing a different game here, aren't we, with this bike? And if you're worried, you can always carry a rotor pack or some other kind of fuel pack. But I've never really felt the need at the places that I tour on the bike. So yeah, what's the fuel economy like? Very good. What's the fuel range like? Perfectly acceptable. Frequently asked question number 8. Is the Triumph Scrambler suitable for shorter riders? See this one a lot on forums. There is no denying that this is a tall bike. It's a tall bike and it's quite top heavy bike. But the 3 models have different seat heights. The tallest is the XE, which is this one here, which has a standard seat height of 870 millimeters. The XC has a seat height of 840 millimeters, so that's quite a bit shorter. So certainly I've seen that smaller riders have tended to go for the XC over the XE, but then the X model is lower still, and that has a standard seat height of 820 millimeters, which is very significantly lower than the XE. For all 3 of those bikes, though, you can get the lower seat, which I mentioned earlier on in the video. So there is a lower seat. The disadvantage of the lower seat is obviously it has less padding in it, so it's going to be less comfortable. But that does drop the seat height by about 20 to 25 millimeters. So if you get the X model with the lower seat on it, that gets the seat down to 795 millimeters, which is a lot more manageable for shorter riders. There is also the option to lower the suspension. I know certainly Tech bike parts make a lowering kit where you can basically replace the springs in the rear suspension, which will reduce the height. So I know some riders who they really wanted the XE model, so they bought the XE and then lowered it. And then, of course, if the XC and the X models are still a bit too tall for you, there is the option there of getting a lowering kit and reducing the height. But I think it depends on how confident you are. I'm 6'1", and I can get both my feet on the ground on my XE. But having said that, when I stop, I rarely put both feet down. I'm in the habit, and because I'm used to riding very tall, enduro racing bikes, things like that, I'm in the habit of just putting one foot down, sliding slightly to one side and putting one foot down. And I see a lot of shorter riders doing that. So if you are confident doing that, riding a bike that you can't get both feet down on the ground, as long as you know you can get one foot down, then that's fine. But I know a lot of less confident riders, they want to be able to put both feet down on the ground. So hopefully that clarifies for you. If you are on the smaller side, then probably the X model is the best one to go for. Frequently asked question number 9. What are the service intervals on the Triumph Scrambler 1200? Well, the answer is pretty good and certainly comparable with other bikes. I should say that I have made available on my Buy Me a Coffee page, and I'll put a link below. I have made available service schedules, service sheets for the bike, which tells you all the what has to be done at the different intervals on the bike. They're available for free, and there are a lot of other resources for the Triumph Scrambler on there. You don't have to buy me a coffee. I just use that because it's a convenient place to make documents available for people to download. I will also say I've made several videos about doing service work on the Triumph Scrambler. So for example, I made a video going through the full 10,000 mile service on the bike. And I've made other service videos such as changing the brake pads, replacing the drive chain and sprockets, things like that. There's a lot of resources. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel, then please do click the subscribe button and subscribe, because, you know, as I own the bike, as I do more work on it, I make more and more videos about working on the bike. And so, you know, I'm sort of slowly building up a library of what I hope, you know, are useful resources for other owners. But the short answer is that the standard service interval is 10,000 miles, as I just mentioned, which is pretty good. 10,000 miles, that equates to 16,000 kilometers, or annual. Obviously, most manufacturers have that annual. So, you know, I think for most riders that means it's an annual service. I find the bike very easy to work on if you want to do your own servicing. As I said, I've made quite a few videos. I find the bike very easy to work on, but it's not too onerous if you take it into to a dealer to have it done. It's not too onerous a schedule. I've no idea how much dealers charge for 10,000 mile services. No idea, because I've never taken one in. But the oil capacity of the bike is, what I remember now, 3.8 litres. The engine oil is 3.8 litres. So it's got a decent quantity of oil in it. And I think that's why they can get away with such a long service interval. You know, if it had a much smaller oil capacity, then you would be looking to change the oil more frequently. But, you know, I use fully synthetic oil in mine, and so I feel quite comfortable leaving it that kind of time. No, the only exception is just I always change the oil just before I go on a long tour. Then I know I'm starting off on a fresh, you know, for the price of oil and an oil filter, it's worth doing that. But anyway, I'm rambling on. Let's get on to the 10th and final frequently asked question. So the final question, frequently asked question number 10, is: does the Triumph Scrambler have any electronic rider aids? And I think people ask this because it looks like a retro bike. You know, it looks like a bike that possibly hasn't got any of these things on it. But the answer is yes, it does. It's quite well equipped. The bike that's best equipped is the XE model, and that's got things like, you know, cornering, you know, ABS, traction control. I'm not into all the technical details, but it's got, you know, much higher spec on it. All of the three models, the XE, the XC, and the X, have different rider modes. So if I remember rightly, there's the standard road mode, there's rain mode, there's sport mode. There is a programmable, you know, rider mode, one that you can configure yourself, and then there is an off-road mode. But then the XE model has a further off-road pro mode, and that allows you to switch the ABS and the traction control right off, and it remaps the throttle to off-road mode. So as I've already said with one of the earlier questions, if you buy the bike to ride off-road, then the XE is definitely the best one to get. There is also some sort of fancy connectivity, Bluetooth connectivity to the digital console, because these bikes have digital consoles. I've never explored any of those, never used them, but there is apparently the facility to connect your GoPro to the bike through the console, so that you can work the GoPro controls from the, you know, the handlebar controls on the bike. I do, if you see me riding videos, I do use a GoPro. I've never tried connecting it. It's not necessary. I just, you know, switch the GoPro on and use it, and that's it. There is also, again, I've never looked at this, there is also a facility to use Google navigation and have the navigation come up on the screen. Apparently you link it with your phone via Bluetooth. Again, I've never done that, but I just don't use these things. For example, I don't link to Bluetooth headsets or anything like that. That's just my riding philosophy. So I do have a GPS on the bike, but I have a separate GPS. It's a TomTom rider, and I've wired that in separately to the bike. Again, I made a separate video about that. So yeah, so that's that. The answer is yes. There is. It's a thoroughly modern bike in terms of the electronic gadgetry on it, and also the higher spec bikes like mine, they come as standard. I don't think they do now, but when I bought mine, it came standard with heated grips, and so, you know, it's and well, there's a USB outlet on it as well. So yeah, fairly well appointed, you know, considering it's a retro style bike. So there you are. That is the 10 most frequently asked questions about the Triumph Scrambler 1200. If you are looking at buying one of these bikes, I hope that you've found this useful. And please do have a look through my channel at the other resources I've made available about the Triumph Scrambler 1200. It's ongoing, I keep adding more videos. Please do consider subscribing to the channel. But thanks a lot for watching, ride safe, and I do hope I'll see you again soon. Bye.